Hello, Luke. Welcome to Lesson 16. So today we're going to be working with more evaluation. We started looking at this back in Lesson 14, and today we're just going to dig into it a little bit deeper and see what else we can do. So as a quick review, I've thrown a couple problems on the board here, and we're going to work through these. These are basically straight from your Lesson 14 work, so this isn't anything new, and hopefully you should be able to whiz right through these. So let's do them together though, or actually better yet, why don't you pause the video and take this first problem, we'll call this problem number 1, and just take a look at it and try to solve it on a separate sheet of paper, and then push play and we'll work through it together. All right, so hopefully you've worked through that problem and you got the right answer, and let's find out. So to begin with, we're going to just look at the problem. Notice that we're evaluating, we're plugging in the -4 for all of the A's in the problem. We're plugging in a -2 for all of the B's in the problem. So we're going to start by just rewriting it. And you'll notice when I rewrite these, I'm going to add parentheses for everything that I plug into the problem. Now, once you've done a lot of these and it becomes almost second nature in your head, you won't need to add all of these parentheses, but if you're feeling uncomfortable with them or if you're not getting all of them right, definitely use this technique because it will help you to keep things organized in your writing and prevent you from losing negative signs, because that's generally what happens if you do it the other way. So let's go ahead and do that. So what we're going to do is we'll start with this A here, and instead of an A, we're going to write the -4. But I am going to put that -4 in a set of parentheses. So I'm just visualizing where this A is, and instead of an A, I'm writing a parentheses set here, and inside that I'm writing my -4. All right, that's all I'm doing. And then I'm going to continue by writing the negative sign exactly as it appears in the original problem. All right, now as I work my way through, any sets of parentheses or brackets or any other symbols of inclusion that have variables inside of them, we're going to upgrade those symbols of inclusion to the next step up. So if you recall, just set these over here maybe, the sets of inclusion, you start with the parentheses. If you go out further from that, you go to brackets. And if you go out further than that, you go to the braces, right? So that's kind of the order in which we use these symbols of inclusion. And so when I say we're going to upgrade the symbol of inclusion here, we have a parenthesis. We're going to upgrade it to the next level, which is a bracket. So instead of writing that parenthesis, we're going to write it as a bracket. Maybe I'll just do this in a different color so that you know that that's what we're doing. So we're taking this parenthesis and we're changing it to this bracket. All right, now we have a variable, and again, every time I see that variable, I'm going to instead put a set of parentheses, and then I'm going to put what's the value of that variable. In this case, it's a -4, so we plug it in. Now I've got another variable, a b, so we'll do the same thing, set of parentheses, and in that we have a -2. All right, now I've got a negative sign, so we're just going to copy that down exactly as it is in the original problem. And then I have an A, so I have to plug in another set of parentheses. So this becomes a negative parenthesis, -4. All right, and then I have this closing parenthesis, but remember, all of the symbols of inclusion, if they have variables inside of them, which this one does, we're upgrading those. We're upgrading those, get the right color here, we're upgrading those to the next level. So this is going to become my ending bracket. All right, so again, do you see how that worked? We took that parenthesis, it became this bracket. We took this parenthesis, it became this bracket. All right, we upgraded it. And then we placed all of our variables in sets of parentheses. And again, once you have developed this in your mind and created a habit of doing it correctly, you won't necessarily need to put all of these red parentheses in around all of your variables. However, there are certain places where you have to, especially in terms of multiplication. So this AB, you really have to set these two in parentheses, because if you don't, you're not going to have that multiplication that is indicated between that A and the B. And we want to make sure that we know these are being multiplied by each other. So in that case, the easiest thing to do is to write those parentheses in. So you really always have to write those parentheses. But later on, for example, in this first one here, this A, you might say, well, I could have just written that as -4 and not bothered with the parentheses. That is true, but in the beginning here, it's much better for you if you just put all of your variables in parentheses. You'll find you'll get far more of them correct when your papers are graded. So I would highly recommend doing it this way, putting them in parentheses, as tedious as that sounds, until you have done so many of them that you're very confident that you can get the right answer without necessarily putting in these parentheses. All right, so now at this point, we're going to go ahead and just simplify what we have. So this -4, we can now say, well, there's nothing more internal here, and it's, in other words, it only has a -4 in the set of parentheses. There's no other addition or multiplication going on. So we've simplified it as far as we can. It's down to just one number. So we can essentially drop the parentheses if, and I'm going to stipulate this, if there is no multiplication going on with this number. All right. If there's multiplication, don't drop them. Leave them there for now. But if there's no multiplication, then you can drop them. So again, let me say that. If there's no multiplication and we have a single number left over in here, you can go ahead and drop them. All right. So in this case, we're just going to write this as a -4. And then we have our minus sign. I'm just rewriting essentially. And now we've got this set of green brackets and inside a bunch of stuff. So we're going to go to the internal parts of this first. What do we have? Well, let's rewrite our bracket. We won't lose those yet. We're doing what's inside the brackets first. So if we look at what's inside the brackets, what do we have? We have a -4 times a -2. Well, negative times a negative is a positive. So we're going to have a positive answer, and 4 times 2 is 8. So we end up with an 8, right? Now we still have this -4 over here. So a -4 is going to become a +4, correct? So we have our +4 after that. And now we can conclude with our bracket. Now we can solve for the brackets, which is really easy here. We have a +12, but bear in mind we have this negative out here, so it's actually a negative +12, which is going to turn it into a -12. And then of course we still have our -4 to the outside. So -4 and -12, we can add those together. And what do we get? -16. Watch out, it is still a negative. Sometimes people forget that when we're adding two negative numbers, we still get a negative. When we multiply two numbers, that's when the negative becomes a positive if we have two negatives. So negative times a negative is a positive. Negative plus a negative is a negative. All right, so kind of watch out for that. Don't lose that sign. It's probably one of the most common mistakes that you can make, is to lose track of a negative sign. So that is our answer there. And again, that should be just review, and hopefully that's what you got on your page. Go ahead and try this second one here. Pause the video and come back and we'll see how you did. All right, so let's go ahead and try this one. So once again, we're going to plug in our values for each of our variables, and we're going to do that by adding parentheses. Now, when we add or substitute in or plug in our variable values, keep in mind this is like the one time where you want to actually ignore the sign in the original problem and only plug in the variable. So here, what we're going to kind of do is separate this negative sign from the x. All right, so we have our negative sign, and then we're going to add our parentheses. All right, so normally I say keep the sign with the variable. You probably heard me say that before. Always keep the sign with the variable. This is like an exception to that. So when we're substituting in, when we're evaluating these problems, you actually want to separate that negative from the variable. because this variable is being replaced by whatever this is, and only by that. This value is only for the variable. It's not really taking into account this sign. So keep the signs separate and then go to the variable. So now we've got inside, we have this x, which is a -4, and then we have that being multiplied by another variable, an a. So we'll just, again, set another set of parentheses out for that. And our a is a -2, so we'll plug that in. Now we keep writing. Now notice the next thing we have is this symbol of inclusion, this parenthesis. We're going to upgrade that. That's what I said earlier. We're upgrading it because we have variables within the set of parentheses. So we'll upgrade that variable, or that, excuse me, that symbol of inclusion to, maybe we'll just go back to that color again, to another bracket. All right? And maybe I'll just throw another bracket here, let's say. That'll be my closing bracket. Inside that set of brackets, we have an a. And again, it's a variable, so I'm going to put it in parentheses and have our a, which is a -2. And then we have a plus sign, which we're just copying straight down from the original problem. And then we have an x, and an x is a -4. So we'll, again, set in a set of parentheses, turn that into a -4. All right? Now, continuing with the problem, we have a plus sign following what is now a bracket, and we have our x. And our x, again, we'll put it in parentheses for the -4. All right, so at this point, we're ready to simplify. So kind of starting from the left and working our way over. A lot of multiplication going on here. Here we have a negative. You might think of this as a negative times a -4. Okay, it's not negative plus a -4. This is a negative times a -4, or the opposite of a -4, or a -4, all of which are going to give you a +4. So we end up with a 4 here times our -2, and I'm just kind of taking this one step at a time. Inside the brackets, let's work on that a little bit here. So we have a -2 plus a -4, which is -6, closing a bracket. And then we have that plus sign that we're still just kind of bringing right down from the original. We have a plus, well, actually, you know what? We can work that a little bit. We have this plus -4. Now, a plus -4, or you can think of it as a plus times a -4, plus and a -4 is going to give us a -4. Correct? All right. So now we can keep simplifying. We have a 4 times a -2. Now 4 times a -2 is going to give us a -8. And then we have our bracket, which I'll just write in red now. So we have -6 in the bracket. And then we have our -4 at the end here that we're adding to this product. So we have a -8 times a -6, which is a -48 minus the 4. So we have a -48 plus a -4 is a -52. All right, so that is our solution there. All right, now that's just a review. We're going to work today on some more complicated problems. So I'm going to write down a couple here and get ourselves set up. Essentially, what I'm doing is just we're going to be doing some problems that are a little bit more complicated in the sense that they have more symbols of inclusion. So they just look a little more complicated, but all the steps are the same. So we have a -a. Now we're going to throw a bracket in, -a, parenthesis p minus a, ending bracket. And we'll say that I'm basically pulling this straight out from our textbook. All right, so that'll be the first problem here. Nothing has changed again. We're just evaluating, and we're going to use the same exact steps. So we have a negative sign. Well, bring that down. Now we have an a. What is an a? It's a -4. So we're going to put that in parentheses, -4, right? So all I've done is just replaced that with a -4 with parentheses around it. Now remember, we are upgrading our symbols of inclusion. So this has a bracket. Remember, the next upgrade for a symbol of inclusion that's a bracket is your brace. So we put our brace in place. And then we keep moving on. So now we have a negative sign. We'll keep that. A, well, that's a variable. So replacing that with our -4. Now we have a parenthesis. But remember, we're upgrading. So we'll upgrade that to a bracket. All right. Then we have our P, which is a -2. We're going to put that in parentheses because that's a plug-in. And then we have a minus sign. So we have our minus. Now we have our A, which is another variable. So that's another set of parentheses, which is a -4, ending parenthesis. And then we have ending bracket. Well, actually, no, not ending bracket. I'm sorry. We have ending parenthesis. So ending parenthesis is going to be this color, I believe, is what I use, the ending bracket. And then we have the ending bracket, which gets upgraded to an ending brace. All right. So hopefully that kind of makes sense there. Notice, maybe I'll just do this. Remember, these brackets became the braces. All right, and these parentheses became the brackets. And then all the other parentheses I added in because of the variables we were plugging in. So now let's keep working. Maybe we'll go back to black here. So we have a negative times a -4, which is +4. And then we have our brace. I'm just going to leave that. And we're going to look at the set of braces, and we're going to say, okay, well, what's the innermost thing that we could work on here? Well, the innermost thing is going to be what's within these brackets. So maybe we'll just move down here, throw these brackets back in place, and just kind of work on what's within these brackets. So we have a -2 minus a -4. All right, so that's equivalent to a -2 minus -4 is a +4, right? Now notice that these two numbers are not being multiplied by each other. So it is not -2 times -4. And this does not become -2 times a +4. We're adding, the addition is right here in this negative sign. All right, there is no multiplication between these two. It's addition. So we need to keep that addition. So it's a -2, but then the -4 turns it into a +4. So now it's a -2 plus 4, and a -2 plus 4 is simply a 2, correct? So that's all within the brackets. Over here, we have a -4. Again, it's equivalent to saying, that invisible 1 that's hiding right here, -1 times a -4, which is a +4. So this is a +4. Now notice here, I am implying multiplication between these two. And the reason is there's an implication of multiplication here. All right, so we don't have a minus sign here like we did over here. This is an invisible multiplication sign. So this does become a +4 times whatever's in these brackets, which happens to be a 2. All right, hopefully you see that. All right, then we continue. So now we have our 4. And inside here we have a 4 times 2. So we have our brace. 4 times 2 is 8. Ending brace. Now again, we have multiplication here. That's been true since the beginning. It was a times up here. It's -4 times right here. So we still have this 4 times, right? So 4 times 8 is 32. And that is going to be our solution. All right. So the only difference here is we have more symbols of inclusion involved in the original problem. All right. So let's try another one here. Let's go to this one. So if I have, let's see here, -a brackets, -a. All right, let's try this one where p is equal to a -4 and a is equal to a 2. Let's do that. So go ahead and push pause on the video and give this one a whirl. All right, so let's see how you did. So we have, whoops, go back here. We have our negative sign. We're just copying that down. We have a variable, a. Let's plug it in a set of parentheses, which is a 2. Now we have a bracket. We're going to upgrade that. We're going to upgrade it to the next thing, which is a brace, followed by a negative sign. That just comes right down. Then we have an a, another variable, so we plug it in, set of parentheses. Then we have a parenthesis, which we're going to upgrade. Yeah, so we'll go to maybe this color. So upgrade to a bracket. And then we have a p, which is a variable, so we have a negative 4. And then we have a minus sign. And we have a, which is a 2. We put it in parentheses. We have an ending parenthesis. Well, that would be the ending bracket now, because we're upgrading it. And then we have a bracket, which is now going to be a brace. All right, so there, we have everything plugged in now. It's just a matter of simplifying. All right, so we have a negative times a 2, which is a negative 2. We have our brace. Now, what have we got inside this brace? We're going to look at the innermost set of symbols of inclusion, which in this case is kind of these braces with the parentheses inside. So we have a negative 4. Maybe we'll just throw in these braces. We have a negative 4 minus 2. And again, this is not multiplication. There's no multiplication going on in here. It's a negative 4 minus a 2. Okay, so negative 4 minus 2 is negative 6, correct? All right, that's our brackets. Outside the brackets, we have a negative 2. So we can simplify that by saying negative 2. Notice there still is this multiplication going on right here. Okay, so then we close that off, and now we can work this. So we have a negative 2, and inside this set of braces, we have a negative 2 times a negative 6, which is a positive 12. Multiplying that out, we get our negative 24. So hopefully that's what you got when you tried it. If not, go back and look and make sure you see what you did wrong, and just make a mental note not to do that mistake again. All right, let's go on. Let's try another one here. How about, well, actually, all right. So go ahead and pause the video and try this one. All right, let's see how you did. So we're plugging things in. I'm just continuing to use red here. So we have a P. A P is a negative 2. Then we have an A. Well, an A is a negative 4. Then we have a bracket. We're upgrading it. Upgrading that to parentheses. And then we have a negative sign. So we bring that straight down from that P. Just bring that negative straight down. We have a P, which is a negative 2. So we plug that in, negative 2. Then we have a parenthesis. Well, that gets upgraded to a bracket. And then we have a negative. So that's just going to come straight down. Don't lose track of him. He comes straight down. And then we have an A. And the A is a negative 4. We're going to put that in parentheses. And then we have our closing parenthesis, which gets upgraded to a closing bracket. And then we have a closing bracket, which now gets upgraded to a closing brace. All right, now we can simplify. So we have a negative 2 times a negative 4. Well, that's 8. Okay, and then we have our brace. Now here we have a negative times a negative 2 times a bracket, negative 4, ending bracket. So if we want to do the brackets first, we could say the negative 4 is just going to be a positive 4, right? And then we have a negative times a negative 2, which is going to be a positive 2. Now be aware, again, there's multiplication there. So we have a 2 times the 4, ending brace. All right, so the rest is pretty simple. Now we can take our 2 times the 4, which of course will be the 8, and that is being multiplied by another 8, giving us a grand total of 64. So that would be the solution for that one. Hopefully that is what you got when you tried as well. Let's try one more here before we call it a lesson. So let's try this one. All right, so again, pause the video, try it on your own first, and then we'll come back and try it together. All right, so let's see how you did. So we have our negative sign. I'll just bring that straight down. We have our x, which is, of course, our negative 2. And then we have a bracket. Upgrade it to the brace. Oh, don't like that. Let's go to a different color. There we go. All right, then we have a negative sign, so we'll bring that straight down, followed by our x. So our x was a negative 2, so we have to plug that negative 2 in. And now we have a parenthesis, so we're going to upgrade that to a bracket, right? And then we have another x, which will be our negative 2 once again. And then we have that negative sign, which we're just going to bring straight down. So we have the x minus a, so we have the negative 2 minus an a, which is a negative 5, so we'll put that in. Right? And then we have our ending parenthesis, which becomes our ending, get the right color here, the ending bracket. And after our ending bracket, we have a negative sign, so we plug that in. And then we have a parenthesis, which gets upgraded once again to another bracket, right? And then we have an a, so we'll plug the a in, which is a negative 2 inside parentheses. Then we have our negative sign, followed by an x, which is the, oh, excuse me, I made a mistake there. Well, let's put this in first. This is a negative 2. Let me erase this guy, because that was an A, and an A is a negative 5. All right, so we have the negative 5 minus the x, ending parenthesis, which becomes an ending bracket, and then an ending bracket, which is going to get upgraded to our ending brace. Let me just make sure that I plugged all those in right here. So we have our negative 2, negative 2, negative 5, negative 5, negative 2. Yes, that looks good. All right, so let's go ahead and simplify this then. So if we've got a negative, negative 2, of course that's going to give us our positive 2. Then we have our brace. So let's look at what's inside this brace. And we've got a lot going on in here. So where should we start? Well, let's start with the innermost pieces, which in this case would be the 2 brackets. We've got brackets with parentheses within them. So let's solve those brackets first. So we have a bracket right here. And we have a minus sign between the brackets. And here's our other bracket. So let's get those out of the way. So if we have a negative 2, minus a minus 5. Well, that's going to be equivalent to a negative 2 plus a 5, right? So we have a negative 2 plus 5, which is going to give us a 3, right? So that bracket simplifies down to a 3. Now over here, we've got our negative 5 minus a minus 2. And again, I know I keep saying this, but it's so important. Remember, we're not multiplying any of these. This is all addition. So we're saying a negative 5 minus a minus 2, which is a plus 2, right? So we have a negative 5 plus 2. It's not negative 5 times 2. So negative 5 plus 2 is a negative 3, okay? So there we go. We've got our 2 brackets kind of simplified here. All that's left is what's over here, right? We've got this negative, negative 2, and that negative, negative 2 is going to become a positive 2. Now this one does have multiplication implied, so just keep that in mind. And then we have our ending parenthesis on the end. All right, so taking it one step further, let's look at these braces now and see what we can do on the inside. So we've got the 2 times the 3. Well, that's going to give us our 6. And now we've got a minus, again, no multiplication here. This is a minus a minus 3, which is going to turn it into a plus 3, right? Hopefully you're following me there. All right, last step. So we have a 6 plus 3, which is going to give us a 9. And then that's being multiplied by the 2. Piece of cake. So 2 times 9 is 18. And 18 is our solution after all of that. So hopefully that makes sense, Luke. Again, this isn't anything crazy. It's pretty much just an extension of what we were learning in lesson 14. We're just complicating things a little bit more by throwing in a couple additional symbols of inclusion. All right, so probably the best advice I can give you is just to go slow. Try to maybe add a few more steps than you feel you need to, just so that you make sure you don't forget a multiplication or a minus sign. It's usually the negative sign. And you don't get confused on when you're supposed to multiply and when you're supposed to add. All right, so that concludes our lesson for today. Go ahead over into OneNote and you can start working on the problems for this lesson.